morning. It hit me there that churches use a lot of like inside language that you might not necessarily understand where we're coming from. And so, like so far this morning, you've learned that if you come to the retreat, you might be stuck there. And we call ourselves a weird herd. That just means eclectic, where we see ourselves as all different ages and stages of life, and we all come together because we want to worship the Lord and be connected to each other, and we know how much God loves us. So there's that. Going into our marriage, Bree and I knew that she was a carrier of a genetic disease called Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. Boys can get it, and girls can be carriers of it. The condition results in a barely functioning immune system, along with platelets, blood platelets that are low in number and misshapen. So, in simple terms, your blood can't clot, and the common cold can kill you. We knew that if we had kids, there was going to be a 50% chance that the girls would be carriers, and there would be a 50% chance that the boys would get it. And so each time when we were pregnant, we have two boys, we knew that it was going to be a possibility, and so it was just scheduled right away, right when they were born, immediate blood test, look at the platelets. If the count's low, if they're shaped funny, they've got it. If the count's normal, they don't. Like, it was as simple as that. And I can remember both moments where I got the report from the test. With Jameson, our oldest, he was in the NICU for something completely different. But I was sitting there next to his side, and they just came up to me, they handed me a piece of paper. Actually, they didn't hand it to me, they just put it on the table. And I looked at it, I looked at the number, it's normal, he's fine, he doesn't have it. Nathaniel, on the other hand, I knew the second they did the blood test. They poked his thigh, and it wouldn't stop bleeding. Had to wait, for the actual test to confirm it, but I knew he had it. Treatment for Wiskott is a bone marrow transplant. And if it's done before the age of 2, the cure rate is greater than 90%. So we did some research and found that the best doctor in the world for this disease, I called her the Tiger Woods of Wiskott-Aldrich, was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I wish I could display for you, in some sort of visual way, all the emotions that were swirling in us as parents, because we were scared, but we were also hopeful. A bone marrow transplant is not minor. It's a big deal, and there's a lot that can go wrong. But we're talking about the best doctor in the world. How do we get him treatment in Cincinnati? We live in Dallas. I have a job, I'm a pastor of a church, and we have a 3-year-old. Can't just leave for at least 6 months. That's how long, if everything goes perfectly, that's how long this is going to take. So we made a decision. Bree is going to move with Nathaniel to Cincinnati. We're going to get an apartment, and then we'll go together, and then I'll come back with Jameson while this is all going on. What you might not know is Cincinnati is where I grew up. So I knew the neighborhoods, knew the streets, but we also just knew tons of people there. And here's what this meant. When we arrived at this apartment that we'd rented, we had taken a private plane to get there. There's a ministry that connects private pilots with medically, you can't fly because of whatever you're dealing with. So we got there, got to the apartment, and it was furnished. There was a toddler bed for Jameson with a giant stuffed alligator. The pantry was full. There were all of these things that you don't think about until you know that you don't have them, and then they become stressful, like hand soap, paper towels, toilet paper, hand towels for washing dishes and drying things. All of that was taken care of. How did that happen? When I was in college on the northwest side of Cincinnati, I was a Young Life leader, which is a ministry to kids that don't know Jesus in high schools. And the kids who were part of my Young Life club when I was in college, they were all adults now, married with their own kids, but they all lived in Cincinnati. So they set the apartment up so that when we got there, we didn't want for anything. Another way was we couldn't go to church. We have an immunocompromised kid. Coming into any kind of church would just be crazy. But that's all right, because one of my friends from high school was the worship pastor at a megachurch. And he tells me that on Saturdays, the worship team and the pastor, every Saturday afternoon, they go through the entire service, top to bottom, as if it was live. So we go to the church, he takes us in, puts us in a cry room where we can see and hear the service. We're completely by ourselves, but we can worship with them. Even though we were experiencing the trial of our lives, we could feel God's presence through the hands of his people. We all deal with stuff, okay? We all go through things. There is a spectrum from the trivial on one side to the tragic on the other, and all kinds of things in between. And what most of those have in common is that they have pain as their feature. I don't know if there's anything that affects us more. Pain gets our attention. It demands our action. None of us want to stay there, but it can also paralyze us, where we feel like all we can do is hurt. And I know that I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Nothing makes us question God, his existence, his presence, his character, more than pain, because nothing more feels more out of place. Where it happens to us and we say, this isn't right. It wasn't supposed to be like this. And you're absolutely correct. It wasn't supposed to be like this, but the world has fallen, and here we are. God, in his sovereign wisdom, has decided to make use of it rather than eliminate it. And because God is God, we can trust that he has a reason for doing so. This morning, we're going to start a 4-week study of the book of Ruth. If you've read it, you know that it doesn't begin awesomely, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. We benefit more by looking truth in the face rather than looking away for something more visually palatable. Ruth centers on a woman whose life is put through the ringer. Her name's not Ruth, it's Naomi. And God is there the entire time, even though it doesn't feel like it at first. But he's at work on something in her, in those around her. And he is at work on something far bigger than any of them are aware. And I think the same is true today. And God is at work on us and around us and on something far bigger than we might ever realize. Which is why I think that from this book, really from chapter 1 where we're going to be this morning, we can learn what pain can do in the life of the Christian. So if you haven't yet, please open to the book of Ruth. The first half of the first verse, okay, sets the stage for us in a way that's meant to get our attention. It says, "Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land." This isn't a good thing. Like, not the famine part, but the fact that this is happening in the time of Judges. The very end of Judges, the very last verse, the book ends with these words. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That note on which Judges ends is the note that's playing as Ruth begins. And if the moral cesspool wasn't enough, you've got a famine. Take depravity, add to it widespread hunger, and it's no wonder that we see the second half of verse 1, a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. A sojourn isn't a visit. It means that you plan on staying there for a while. Verse 2, the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there, hence the word sojourn. Now, just as a public service announcement, okay? Some of us don't like to read the Bible out loud because we know we're going to get the names wrong. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. No one gets them right, okay? I don't mean, generally speaking, no one gets them right, okay? Biblical Hebrew is a dead language. No one speaks it. Modern Hebrew is not the same as biblical Hebrew. I don't know if you've ever read Beowulf in the original Old English, but it's not the same as our English, okay? Just because you could speak one doesn't mean you can speak the other. I'll give you 2 examples. It's not Abraham. It's Avraham. Deborah in the book of Judges, it's not Deborah. It's Devorah. Actually, I have an aunt Devorah, but that's beside the point. The B is a V, okay? But nobody says Avraham. No one says Devorah, because we don't want to be weird. And we don't want to be out of place. So give yourself a little bit of slack when it comes to pronouncing the names. Nobody gets them right. Anyway, okay. We're told in matter-of-fact terms in verse 3, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And she was left with her 2 sons. The man whose name means God is king died. Now, we don't know when in the time of the Judges this happens. And we don't know when or how old everyone was when this is taking place. But we are given, some clues. We can make some deductions on the basis of what's offered. Like verse 4 tells us that Naomi's sons took wives for themselves among the Moabites. The fact that they're not at war with the Moabites, it means they're on good terms with them. So that puts the story somewhere between Judges 3 and Judges 11, should you care about that. But secondly, that they took wives for themselves means probably they are around 20 years old. So let's say they're just 20. And that Elimelech would have gotten married when he was 20. That means he's about 40. Now to us, that's like young. You're just getting started. To them, in that day and age, it was ancient. And so I think that's why it's treated as just matter of fact that he passed away. Because it's not like if somebody passes away in their 80s, we don't see that as out of place. It just is. But then things get exponentially worse. It says, then both Machlon and Chilion also died. And the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. I want you to note the difference in verse 3, where it says that she was left with her 2 sons. In verse 5, it says she was bereft. meaning she is left with nothing. Her name is used in verse 3. In verse 5, she's just called the woman. It's as if her entire identity has been stripped away. It's just gone. And God let it happen. What can pain do in the life of the Christian? Pain can feel like God's abandoned us. Pain can feel like God's abandoned us. And I say that because to this point, God is not mentioned. And I think that's on purpose, where it's as if he is a character that is off stage. And we're left to wonder what in the world is going on. Where is the Lord in all this? I don't really care if it's the 14th century before Christ or 2,000 years after the birth of Christ. We all wonder the same thing when this kind of thing happens. God, where are you? What are you doing? Why in the world would you let this happen at what feels like maybe the worst possible time? Because it's one thing if all of this goes down in Israel, but it doesn't. It's Moab. Okay, it's one thing if she loses her children but not her husband, or her husband but not her children, but she loses all of them. One commentator put it well, in Israel, there was no greater tragedy than for a family to cease to exist. She can't start over again. In verse 12, she will say, I am too old to have a husband. That means she is past the age where she can have children. Women of her age, in that day and age, for this to happen, it meant she had nothing. She had no means to provide for herself. She is an alien in a foreign land. The past is irrelevant. The present is a nightmare. And her future, the idea that she could possibly have children who would carry on the family name, that has evaporated. Why? Why now? Why in a foreign land? It feels like God is on a lunch break. And it's okay to say it. We don't get any medals or merit for pretending otherwise or hiding our emotions. If you want an example, look at Naomi. We're not going to ignore the middle of the chapter, okay? We're going to come back to it. But I want you to look towards the bottom, okay? Specifically verse 13. She has good things to say about how she hopes the Lord will relate to her daughters-in-law, but then look at her perspective when it comes to how she thinks God feels about her. Okay? She will say at the end of verse 13, it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. That phrase, okay, the hand of the Lord, when combined with against, it's something bad, all right? The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. The hand of the Lord was against Pharaoh. You put those two things together, it just means God's not your friend. And she is seeing herself in that light, okay? If you jump down to 19, I want you to see her state of mind, okay? We're going to cover the stuff in the middle. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem. This is verse 19. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? Stirred is a good thing, okay? It's the same word used of Solomon when he is crowned king in Israel. Like, it's a joyous uproar. They're happy that she's back. But she doesn't feel that way. She can't even stand the sound of her name. She knows it means pleasant. But to her, she's saying or thinking, does anything about me look pleasant? Do you remember what it was like when I left here? Do you remember what I had with me? Do you remember who isn't with me right now? Does any of this give off pleasant? She says in verse 20, call me Mara. Why? Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, even though it was a famine. Even though they were starving, she still saw herself as full. But the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Since the Lord has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me. She is speaking as if there was a trial, and she has been found guilty. That there has been a sentence pronounced, and it has been carried out. In her mind, she must have done evil, because clearly God has responded in kind. What can pain do in the life of the Christian? It can feel like God's abandoned us. Pain can also feel like God's angry with us. Okay, because we know that the Lord's all powerful, right? There's nothing that he can't do except sin. We read that he's good. And so if he's good and there's not anything he can't do, if he's in control of everything, well, then the problem must be with me. I'm the sinner. I've done something to deserve this because God isn't unjust. He doesn't fly off the handle at people. It's not like something happened to him at work and I just happen to be the last straw when he gets home. If he's angry at me, there's got to be a reason, because clearly, look at the result. Look what he did to Pharaoh. Look what he did to the Egyptians. Look at how an entire generation of Israel died in the wilderness. She would have been aware of all that. Now, I know that this might make us ask, okay, if loss happens because God is punishing us for sin, like because God is angry with us over our sin, okay, I want you to be so crystal clear that that's not the case. And there are reasons for that. One is in the Old Testament, when God has that kind of connection, okay, when something gut-wrenching happens in response to something we've done, God makes it clear that the former has caused the latter. Secondly, we live under the new covenant. Okay, a covenant is an agreement. God makes an agreement with his people. Here's how I am going to relate to you. God, because of Christ, does not punish us for our sin. He punished Jesus in our place, not us. Therefore, we are never the recipients of God's wrath. What God does do is discipline us. Okay? But these are two very different things. The purpose of punishment is to punish. The purpose of wrath is judgment. The purpose of discipline is correction. Because God has something good in mind for us. What is that good? It is being conformed to the image of Jesus. God wants to make you like his Son. And so he allows things, all kinds of things, in order to allow you to become more like Jesus. I don't know that that's terribly satisfying, because it's still a gut-wrenching world, and stuff still happens. And even though there's a reason, it is just, unfortunately, to me, so rare that we actually are told what that reason is. I would so love it if we would just get an update every now and then. that God would send something that says, hey, here's why this is happening. You can look out for these certain things in the future. We don't get that. But we can trust that he's up to more than we realize, because that's what's happening, not just in Ruth, it's all over the Bible, but it's really happening in Ruth. Naomi, unfortunately, is not in a place where she can really grasp that. Okay. Back to the middle of the chapter. We looked at Naomi arriving in Bethlehem. We don't know how she got there. Okay, so go back up to verse 6. It says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab. For she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. She does not have a bad view of God. She just thinks God has a bad view of her. She thinks God's good, but that he's angry at her. And so it kind of hits her that maybe her daughters-in-law should go back. Naomi said, verse 8, go, return, each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. A couple things. One, the go and return, the fact that those two words are used, there's a politeness here. And she's talking about kindness. Like she, again, does not think that the Lord has dealt kindly with her, but she does believe that the Lord is kind, and she is hoping that since her daughters-in-law have been kind to her, that God will be kind to them. But that word kind is very, very important. It really is the key word in Ruth. It is a Hebrew word, chesed. It means loyal love or loving kindness. So anytime you come across that word in the Old Testament, loving kindness, it's this word. It's chesed. Like I said, it is the key word in Ruth. It's strategically placed at 3 points throughout these 4 chapters. It means I am for you. I am committed to you. I am at work for your benefit. Because God is capable of this, may God deal with you this way because you have dealt this way with me. She makes this argument because there's pushback. The Moabites don't want anything to do with returning. They want to stay with Naomi. No, we will surely return with you to your people. But Naomi said, return, my daughters. There's no go return now. It's less polite. She's being more insistent. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marriage? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. She's using like an argument from absurdity. Like, let's just say that I got married tonight. Let's just say that I got pregnant tonight. Let's just say that I've had twins and that they both happen to be boys. Or there's enough time for me to have 2 sons. Would you wait for them to grow up to marry you? Because it's not about like the time, it's about the math. So typically, okay, we're just kind of guesstimating here, but typically you get married if you're a woman around 15. They were married for 10 years. So that puts them at 25 when their husbands died. Babies aren't born full grown. So now you got to wait about 20 years. So now the women are 45. Even if you said, we'll have them get married early when they're 15, the women are 40. How practical does that sound? How many times do you think we see a 15 to 20-year-old male marry a 40 to 45-year-old woman in the Bible? I will tell you, it is. It doesn't make any sense. It's redonkulous. Okay? So surely there has to be Moabite men who would gladly marry you. Just go back. And that's what Orpah does. It says in verse 14 that Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she looks at Ruth, whose name in Hebrew is Root. But none of us say root because that sounds like a tree. No one gets it right. Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Do you see what she's doing? That's what I want you to do. Go. And then we get that verse that has ended up embroidered on so many things. Like it's one of those verses that kind of exists outside of the Bible and outside of the context, and people are familiar with it, but nobody has any idea where it actually comes from. It comes from right here. Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. The Moabite god Chemosh, forget about him. I will follow your God. I don't know how much I really even know about your God. We've been together for a while now, but I will follow him. And just in case you think this is like some gesture where, Naomi's kind of old, and so how long is this really going to last? And then once Naomi passes away, then she'll just then return back. No. She says, where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. They will put us next to each other. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. She is saying, you know how we treat sacrificial animals? Like at the Passover. If I abandon you, do that to me. Remember that word, kindness, chesed, loyal love, loyal kindness. This is where God has been the whole time. He is showing her his commitment to her, God's commitment to Naomi. He is showing her through Ruth. Yes, pain can feel like God's abandoned us. And yes, it can feel like God's angry at us. But it also reveals the presence of God. Pain can also reveal God's presence to us. Just in case, okay, we would have any kind of doubt that maybe the Lord won't be as committed to us as he was to Naomi because Naomi's in the Bible. It isn't about you. It's about God's commitment to Jesus and the fact that Christ died for your sin. He died in your place. All the wrath that God wanted to pour out, that justice demanded he pour out because of human sin, it all went on the shoulders of Jesus so that none of it is directed towards you. The degree to which God is committed to Jesus, that the Father is committed to the Son, that is the degree to which God is committed to you. That is how loyal he is to you. And we wonder, well, how are you going to show it? And I think he shows it in a lot of ways, but one of those big ways is through his people. Jesus said that if someone were to give someone else a cup of cold water in my name, it's as if you do it to me. Our actions speak louder than words. And our actions say a lot more than we realize. When we are hurting, we should not be blind to how God is showing himself through the presence of others. The timeliness of a phone call, the timeliness of a hug, or just a hey. The little coincidences that happen. It just reminds you, God is there. As far as though what I think it calls on us to do, it's to incarnate the presence of God to others. Incarnate's a big word. It means put flesh on something. Make it real. I'll put it another way. Be Jesus with skin on. It's not that I don't think we necessarily need to be doing something different, but I am hoping that we see what we do through a different lens. That when we exhibit kindness, when we do a gesture like saying hi to someone, opening the door for someone, very little things, giving somebody a phone call, sending them a text, sending them an email, smoke signals, I don't care. That when that happens, you're communicating the presence of God. That's what I hope you see. That the good that you can do is so much more than you might imagine because of how God uses our good works in the lives of others. God doesn't need your good works. He's fine. Our brothers and sisters in Christ do. The unbelieving world does. Let that be the frame through which you see the good that's out there to do. The first chapter ends. Verse 22, it says, Naomi returned, and with her Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. This is one of those moments where if it were a TV show from like the 70s or 80s, and you could tell that the plot wasn't quite getting resolved in enough time because the end of the show was coming, and then you get this to be continued at the end, that's what the author's doing. He's saying, oh, by the way, it's the beginning of the barley harvest, as if that's going to make a difference in the story, and it will. I hope you're looking forward to chapter 2. But more so, I hope you're looking forward to tomorrow morning, to this afternoon, to tonight, for everything that God has in front of you that gives you an opportunity to communicate his presence to others. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for your word. Thank you for this story, for the fact that there will come a day when we can meet Naomi and Ruth, that we'll be able to pick their brains and just hear the story from their own mouths, from their own perspectives. But I pray, God, that our expectation would be more focused and immediate on what you have before us, Lord. You've told us, Lord, in your word in Ephesians 2:10 that there are works that you have set in front of us to do. You've prepared these beforehand. Give us eyes to see, God, what those might be that we can walk in them. Help us to understand that the little gestures we make, the good that we can do, that you use that to communicate your presence to those who might feel like God has abandoned them. Thank you for all the different ways you make yourself known. Things like sunsets and dogs that seem to smile. Just reminders, Lord, verses we turn to and verses of songs that we sing. Help us to see your presence in the lives of your church for your glory. In Christ's name, amen. Please stand.